Coffee Karim podcast.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Welcome to another episode of Coffee with Kareem. I have co-host Noaman joining me once again. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you too. What's up, everybody? Hope everyone's doing well, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah. It's September, and September, for those of us that don't know, is promoting National Suicide Prevention Month. Suicide is a very serious thing. It's been escalating in the USA, and we're going to talk a bit about some of those stats and news. But I wanted to first begin with my first experiences to suicide. And on the one hand, it's connected to music, and on the other hand, it's connected to, very serious, dark time. So first of all, I was in high school, huge Nirvana fan. For those of us that may have heard of Nirvana, they're probably like considered classic rock now by Gen Z or whatever it is that people are, young people these days. But Kurt Cobain was a famous, 90s grunge alternative rocker, the lead vocalist of Nirvana. And I still remember the dates, like 1967 he was born and committed suicide allegedly in 1994, although there are some conspiracy theories with all that, but that's a different topic.
Yeah.
And I remember that was the first time I really felt, let's say, sadness over suicide, because I loved the band and couldn't understand, as I was probably 10, I think, when this happened. Or no, I was 13, 12. So it's like 7th, 8th grade, very vulnerable age, puberty. I remember that year I also just moved to a new town. So I was starting 7th grade as the new kid. And I remember walking into my first class, it was science class, and this kid named Sean, who ended up being, my friend later, but he's just kind of a clown. And as soon as I walked in, the first thing he said to me was like, "I thought you were going to be black because your name's Kareem." But in that year, I remember music was one of the ways that I soothed myself, right? It was the first, I was really into bands like Metallica and Aerosmith and Guns N' Roses and Nirvana. And then you find out this news, and it was just so devastating to me. There's no new music. I love this guy. I even remember with my identity issues at the time, being a minority, I always wished I had rocker blonde hair like Kurt Cobain. And it's just why would he do something like that? And the way he did it was very vicious, shotgun blast to the head. And of course, I didn't know all the details of heroin addiction and other things that were going on for him. But that was my first exposure, where I felt suicide viscerally. And it wasn't even someone I knew. It was just somebody I related to or connected to via the music. But then I remember senior year of high school. It was so sad, dude. A freshman committed suicide in my school because of bullying. And I remember me and a bunch of seniors always looking for a reason to not go to school. He had a funeral and we wanted to go pay our respects for real. So it was one of those times where we actually missed school for a good reason. And I remember going to this. It was a Jewish family, I recall, and it was the first time I went to a Jewish funeral. And it was just so sad, dude. The picture of the young boy and the parents and, just the whole energy in the air. And it's it was so sad to hear that somebody in our school, walk in our halls, we never noticed, decided to do something like this, and what could bring him to something like this. And by senior year, I already knew I wanted to study psychology, because I took psychology as an elective junior year. And I remember this is what I want to study. I like this subject a lot.
Yeah.
And as a result of this unfortunate event, me and a bunch of friends met with the principal, and we decided to go around to freshman and sophomore classes and do a little presentation on suicide prevention and talk about bullying and basically addressing those matters. So it was one one of the ways that I tried to take that energy and do something useful with it and give back. Then, of course, because I loved Nirvana, there were times where I was depressed in high school, and I had suicidations, never attempted it or anything like that, but I thought about it, right? What would it be like to just turn the lights out, and what would happen? And you'd know everything, right? Like all the answers, right? Because everyone's just the mystery of what happens after death. Like nobody will know until you go to the other side. And then bringing it way up to now, crazy thing that happened last year while I was here in Brazil is, and it was a really, really, again, depressing, traumatic experience. I live in a closed, community condominium in Rio de Janeiro, and there's several buildings in our condominium, and they have maybe 10 floors, so it's like pretty high up, right? And last year, dude, an 18-year-old girl living in my condominium, we didn't know her, jumped off the top and just landed. And it was just a horrific scene. And people took pictures and sent it around on the WhatsApp. And, I saw this photo, dude, and it just like brought me to this really, I felt like just so, it was so dark for that week, man. Like it was just, and I remember making sure like all my kids were praying with my wife and I, and we made dua for the family. And this young 18-year-old girl who, when my wife showed me her Instagram, what you see on it is like parties, guys, living the life, 18-year-old, life is fun, life is great. Like when you look at this Instagram page, you would never assume, right, that she was deeply perhaps depressed, right? And she took this, thing. And what's crazy is some people actually saw her jump and land who lived there, and they were traumatized. And so, bringing it just kind of to some of these incidents around suicidality and, how treacherous and dark it is. And it's such a sad thing that when you look at it, even from a theological perspective, I mean, life is the most priceless gift any of us have. Death is the only fact we all have. And so to get to such a place where you no longer want to breathe, it's such an immense level of pain. And the crazy thing is whether it was the kid in high school who killed himself or this young girl, a lot of times people around them may not know or have a sense of what's going on. It's usually very shocking for some people versus like, oh yeah, we expected that, right? You don't usually hear that, but yeah, I just wanted to start it off by sharing some of those stories around this very important topic. It's, this is the month where we should reflect on it. And I know that there's some recent news also in the state of Texas where you're residing currently. Also connected to the Muslim community, I believe there's some news you'd like to tell us that just as a reminder of how this is something, we need to talk about, we need to take seriously, and we need to do our best to help each other, our community, to prevent this, of course.
Yeah. So so last week, a city here in Allen, Texas, there was a murder-suicide that took place. Now, just to give some backstory as to what the police are alleging as to why the murder-suicide took place in the first at all was because this Muslim family, they had lost their child in a drowning accident earlier in the month of August, right? So detectives are alleging that the father just could not bring himself to accept what had happened to his daughter, right? I mean, you lose your daughter in a drowning accident, man. Like, how do you can't prepare for that? Literally, you cannot, right? And so they're alleging that he had just lost control completely. He had killed his family and then he killed himself. He took his own life. Now, what's crazier about this story is that 2 years ago in the same city in Allen, Texas, there was a murder-suicide that took place and this is again involving a Muslim family, a murder-suicide that took place that involved a family of 6, where there were 2 brothers who had a severe case of depression. And we only know about this because one of the brothers, the younger brother, he had wrote a suicide manifesto and posted it online. And so him and his older brother, who were severely depressed, they had made a pact, which was if they were not better within a year, they were going to take the lives of their families and then take their own life. And subsequently, that's what happened, is that they took the life of their family and then they took their own lives. I remember going to that janazah, the one that happened two years ago, the murder suicide that happened 2 years ago. I went to that janazah, and there has never been a more somber and more just heartbreaking janazah that I've ever attended in my life. And I don't think I'll ever attend one more heartbreaking than that one, because I get there and there's sort of this remembrance that's happening with friends of the family, right? And these are non-Muslim friends. So there's a remembrance happening. People are sort of going up with a microphone to talk about the family, talk about the children that were involved, who they were friends with. And there was a moment where, and off to the side, the grandfather of the family came to the janazah, right? Now, this grandfather, his wife was the grandmother that was involved, of who she was part of the family. She was killed. So the grandfather's wife, his either daughter-in-law or son-in-law, I don't know how he was related to either of them, and all of his grandchildren gone. So he basically lost, I don't know if it's all the family he had here, but definitely his immediate family, lost his entire family. You see him come to the masjid, to the mosque, and he just broke down. He just absolutely broke down. And that was just like, wow, like, that was hard to see, man. And his relatives and like family friends were trying to comfort him, but it's hard, man. Like he's elderly, and it's just, it's not something that, every generation has certain issues that they learn to adapt to and learn how to sort of equip themselves to face, right? And we both know that our parents' generation, certainly not our grandparents' generation, they never had the tools to deal with mental health, right? They never had the tools to reconcile and how to deal with mental health struggles, anxiety, stress, whatever it may be. And, when the actual janazah, the funeral prayer, took place, this is still like COVID, right? COVID time. And so we had to do the janazah outside. And, there was like 150 people that showed up, right, just for the janazah, for the funeral prayer. And I remember, the imam, he starts leading the prayer, and then like everyone's crying, man. Every single person is crying, and it was just a very, very heartbreaking thing to be a part of, because it was almost like everyone had this sense of like, I don't want to be here. Not in the sense of I don't want to support them, but in the sense of like,
it's so heavy.
It's so heavy. Exactly. It's just so heavy, and I remember we had a conversation 2 years ago about that first murder suicide that took place. And one of the things you said to me, and I still remember to this day because it was so profound, was that you had said that this was like a sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this was, what you meant by that was like, this is a sign for our community to start waking up. Like, this is a problem within our community. Suicide is a problem within our community. Mental health is a problem within our community. And if we don't address it, things like
it's a neglected matter. Yeah.
It's a neglected matter. And I remember, man, about 2 weeks ago, so fast forward to, present time, about 2 weeks ago, I was thinking about that initial murder suicide that took place 2 years ago. And I just thought to myself, like, I felt that as a Muslim community, at least in the Dallas area, we haven't really done much to address or continue to talk about this specific topic when it comes to suicide. And to me, I felt like, we have to do something about this, because my fear was like something like this could happen again, man. And then 2 weeks later, my wife is the one that told me about it. She was on her phone. She told me that, like, hey, this just happened. And so,
how eerie.
So it's a very heavy topic, man. And when you were talking about your sort of first exposure to suicide, I try thinking about like my first exposure to it, and my earliest memory, and I'm sure I have earlier memories, but the one that I can remember at this moment was I believe I was in high school or middle school. And there was this guy that I went to school with. I never really talked to him. I was just like Facebook friends with him. And his younger brother had committed suicide. He had just taken a bunch of like pills like ibuprofen or Advil or something like that, Tylenol, whatever it is. And that's how he had committed suicide, by doing that. So that was my first exposure. And I remember, from what I can remember, but when I heard about that, to me, I was just like, it just felt so, it was a strange feeling to think that, a person can just end their life. And what I mean by that is just the thought of like, I've never actually even had never considered something like suicide as a method of a person of wanting to end their life. Like I just never considered that up until that point in my life, if that makes sense, So
Yeah.
for me, I was just like taken aback by the incident, like, whoa, like this is very tragic.
It's extremely tragic. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's like the trophy of shaitan and the demonic energy, because you take the most priceless gift, the most valuable reality, right? Human life, life itself, and you snuff it out, I mean, I'm feeling depressed just thinking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's but this recent news about the father, so there's no other details around like what the police found. Like there were no tests that they did, autopsies. Like was the family all shot like the other family, the one that happened 2 years ago, or like how did they find this family
Yeah,
like were they like how do they know it was
like the incident took place, right?
yeah, how yeah,
Yeah.
what other details are there? Because they're saying it's a suicide murder. They're saying the story is the dad couldn't process the trauma of losing his baby girl, which
Yeah.
again, that's just so tragic.
So the way the police found out about this incident was that there was a welfare worker who was going to this house of the Muslim family. And I don't really know how welfare works as far as like the worker showing up, but I believe it's like a perhaps collecting a payment, or maybe the welfare worker giving some sort of payment, right? And from what I read was that this welfare worker was trying for a couple of hours to contact the family, and this person had like no luck whatsoever, right? And so the person called the police, and it's like, hey, I'm trying to get this I'm a welfare worker, I'm here at this family's house. And then that's when the police showed up, and that's when they discovered the bodies.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it could have been some kind of, I don't know, poison, or it wasn't like he didn't shoot them, basically, like the other
No, he did
case.
shoot them. He did shoot them.
Oh, he did. So there was
Yeah.
bullet wounds and so forth. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh wow.
He shot his family.
Man.
He shot himself. Yeah, just like the other family.
Can't like again just like process that. Like you're so depressed and you have the drive to kill your own family and then kill yourself.
I think for me, this is something that I wanted to even discuss with you, as far as like empathy towards people who do something like this, right? Something that Warren Farrell mentions in his book, The Boy Crisis, and just generally when he talks about school shooters or mass shooters, right? One of the things he says, and I even wrote this down here, is that those people who leave hate groups like neo-Nazi groups or some sort of violent, hateful group, they will usually join this life after hate group, right? And these people, they begin to develop empathy to replace that hate they once had, right? What Warren suggests, Dr. Warren Farrell, what he suggests is that perhaps we as individuals, we can learn to empathize towards the haters. When our only response to haters is to hate, we increase our brain's training to hate and decrease its training to empathize. We become a bit of the enemy we hate. And like, for example, when it comes to school shooters, usually I wouldn't even say usually, most of the time our response is just immediately, we hate this person. We immediately hate them, right? Which is valid to feel that way. But what Warren is suggesting is perhaps maybe we should try and empathize towards them to see what the underlying reasons and motivations were for them to commit such an act, right? And on this sort of topic with the two Muslim families, discussing the two Muslim families, especially with the one that took place 2 years ago, that murder suicide involving the family of 6, I just could not hate those two brothers for the life of me. I couldn't hate them. I just felt I couldn't have any other emotion except to empathize with them. I just simply couldn't. I mean, there was just they were such young men. They were 19 and 21. They were there. That's what their ages. 19 and 21, man, their life was just starting, and I know for myself, I've been in extremely dark places in my life, man. Extremely, extremely dark places, like the darkest of dark. And for people who go beyond that, to even think that people are able to go beyond that because of their circumstance and whatever is happening in their life, like that, that's something that is like, man, I haven't experienced that, but I've experienced an immense amount of pain within me internally. And it's a scary place to be, man. It's a scary place because you don't know, you're just constantly doubting yourself. You have this outlook of nothing is going to work out for me. I'm just this like bottom of the dominance hierarchy barrel, right? Like that's just my situation.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Like this idea of empathizing towards people who do something like this, right?
Yeah. No, that really resonates with me because there is, of course, anybody who is a victim of, let's say, school shooters or what have you, it's not easy for them to be empathetic with the murder of their child, let's say, right?
Yes.
But, people on the outside, like this is something that also came up for me. It's like, what was going on for this young person to do this to themselves or to others? And if we actually take that route of learning what happened to them, trying to empathize, recognize the importance of prevention or mental health education, or the importance of intimacy, relationships, compassion, that's of course going to help us decrease the likelihood of these things happening. Look at like Martin Luther King. Like, he never taught his followers to be racist against the racism, which follows that same principle, right? It's like, I've experienced racism, so I will become racist as a response. I've experienced bullying. I'm abused, so I will become an abuser or a bully in response. It's actually one of the defense mechanisms a human being can choose, right? Or you can have sublimation, which is taking that evil energy in charge and trying to transfer it to the opposite effort to actually reduce that evil in the world, right? So you get robbed on your street walking home. Do you feel resentment and rob somebody to get back at, I'm a victim now and I want justice, and, or do you create a neighborhood watch, to ensure that security is increased in your neighborhood? Like, that would be a healthy way to confront the evil. But that's, of course, much easier, I think, for people who aren't direct victims of it. But I
Yes.
think in principle, it is, a practical, wise way to do it. And yeah, it's just, and what's also, kind of irking me right now, to be honest, is I've always learned, I don't know if you've learned something similar, that in Islam, you don't pray janazah for someone who committed suicide. Have you ever heard this?
I don't think I've ever heard something like that before.
Yeah, I've heard this before, honestly, and but I'm not sure. Maybe I'm mixing that up with something else. But I feel like that's something I came across, because it's such a big sin or whatever. Is like if again, if you want to get technical, if it takes you into the realm of committing an act of kufr, just like you don't pray janazah for a kafir,
Yes.
right? Like, so if I'm Muslim, my dad's not Muslim and he dies, I can't go to an imam and say, I'd like to do janazah for him.
Right.
And, that's not how it works. So I guess it's based on that perspective that I've come across. But nonetheless, the empathy aspect is always going to, it's the way of the prophets, all of the prophets. I mean, even you see this with the Prophet Muhammad SAW, like, he empathized with the communities that fought against him. One case I can recall is, I forget the name of the city he was going to, but it's a well-known story where all the kids were throwing rocks at him and his sandals filled with blood because of
Ta'if, yeah.
Ta'if, thank you.
Yeah.
And Jibreel alayhi salam came and was like, yo, I can flip this whole town over.
Yeah.
And the Prophet empathized and, said, basically similar to what we hear in Christianity, like they know not what they do. And perhaps, there will be some people in this community or those children will grow up differently. And so that's a type of empathy, it's a type of compassion. It's a type of positive expectancy in human nature, given the right guidance, education, reminder, love, support. And all of this certainly applies to such a thing as suicide.
The Islamic approach, that's something that I've always sort of questioned, not necessarily questioned as in doubt, but sort of not something that I have had any sort of answer to my question about an Islamic response to it. And what I mean by that is, when something like this happens in the Muslim community, like a murder-suicide, because it's such a thing that's uncommon within the community, that when it happens, it just takes everyone back, right? Obviously, there are people in the community like myself who do feel helpless when stuff like this happens, right? We feel like there's nothing we can do. And I guess my question is, like, is it inappropriate to think that there's not a solution to the suicide problem?
Well, why would we have Suicide Prevention Month, right? That's the very aim of what you're saying. And I don't think we're helpless. I mean, we're doing something right now just by talking about it, sharing our feelings, making sure people think about it, if anyone listens or watches this. And so I think, look, helplessness is connected to despair. And despair is the ultimate emotion that, let's say, the demonic sphere wants the human being to internalize. And so that's not a win we want to give away so easily, right, to that energy. And so, for example, like, you're in Texas. This could be something you could do something about, like find a group of people who have the same value or principle of, we want to dedicate our time, volunteer by, giving a workshop once a month or once every 2 months or whatever to masajid, where youth, families can learn, reflect on mental health, on depression, on signs of withdrawal, and just help people become more attentive to these things. Or in a case where you go through a major traumatic experience, God forbid, like losing a child or a loved one, making sure there's resources, social support for these things. And this is part of something that's ongoing in our community anyways, right? It's just another reminder, hence why it's a sign from Allah, right? When I said that 2 years ago with this incident of like, it's a reminder for us, for Allah to say, look what happened, at least my interpretation. It's like, look what happened. What does it mean? And what can we do about it? Because لِيَبْلُؤُكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. Allah created us to see which of you will have the most excellent or best of responses to the trials, tribulations, to the evil that's inflicted upon you or in your community, right? Because any person of faith recognizes it's an individual journey and a collective journey. I need to support my community, my of faith, as well as my own soul, and we're all in it together, right? And so, from that sense, I think recognition of being helpless or accepting that as my reality will lead to things like that despair or depression, and I think that's contrary to what people of faith, people of rationale, people of mental health, advocates and so forth are. That's not the energy or the force that they are meant to bring in the world. And so there are things we can do about it. I mean, even just making sure like next time you see a young boy at your local halakha that used to is usually very smiling and looking nice, and you pick up on him just seeming kind of low, just like checking in with him, giving him attention, talking to him, making sure he is known and seen by you. Even statistically, they show that people who call suicide hotlines when they're feeling like this, that's the whole point, right? It's like, I don't know this person. They're on the phone trying to give me validation, attention, approval, even affection. And it actually can help people, right? Not feel hopeless and helpless. That's why they exist. They're 24/7, and there's people out there devoted to that, right? And isolation is one of the big factors of increasing the likelihood of something like this. I think even when I was reviewing on some of the stats, COVID suicidality increased because there was a lot more isolation for people, right? And so if you were already depressed or suicidal or struggling, and now you're locked in the house for 2 years, like it's not a good recipe.
No.
Right?
No. Yeah. And when you mentioned isolation, immediately I thought to sort of how our society and culture operates. And oftentimes we've adapted to the fact that people will just spend all day home. They'll just sit in front of their computer all day home. They'll sit in front of the TV watching Netflix, be by themselves, and just not go outside to just experience the world around you, like basking in the sunlight, just being outside, feeling the cool breeze, upon you, right? Which makes a huge difference on person's mental health. Being in your room all day with the lights, closed, curtains closed, and just sitting in front of a screen. Yeah, that's probably going to mess up some chemicals within your brain, and you're going to be depleted within certain, levels of chemical in your mind, right? And so just the simple fact of going outside, 10 minutes a day for a walk does wonders for you, and will do wonders for you long term, in your life. Or just exercise, things like exercise, right? Getting the body to move, right? One other question that I had for you. So, you said you wanted to study psychology. Like, you knew by the time you were a senior in high school, you wanted to study psychology. What sort of coursework, or let's say research, did you guys have to go through as far as when it comes to suicide? Like, did you guys have to learn about or study, the reasons why a person may commit suicide? And for example, like, why, let's say, a man commits suicide versus why a woman would commit suicide, like differences by gender, and then also differences by ages as well.
Yeah, I mean, when I studied, I didn't have like a focus on that, but there was, of course, kind of general overview, because when you do at least your bachelor's in psychology, you will cover the different aspects, right? Like social and abnormal psychology and clinical psychology, neurobiological. So it is something, of course, you come across, right? Connected to depression, because self-harm is one of the things that you are supposed to be aware of, right? As a mental health provider or a clinician, you can't not report that if you're practicing under license, right? To that somebody is saying like, I'm gonna kill myself tonight. Like you actually have a responsibility now, right? So of course, when it depends on what area of psychology, especially if you're going to be licensed clinician, you're going to have to be more mindful of these, be more trained and aware of these things, and have certain protocols, with social work and so forth. And but common reasons. I mean, we know statistically men are more likely, or the numbers are just higher for men to do it. Why is that the case? It's a good question. Maybe because men have a harder time being emotionally vulnerable in general. Men have a harder time, especially in our age, maybe, to bond with others, whereas females typically have a greater capacity for EQ and socializing and bonding and harnessing social support. That could be one reason. Men generally can also be more risky in their activities and things that they do. And so we also have a higher likelihood of dying from accidents or, things like this.
Or work.
Right? Because statistically, we have a lot more difficult, challenging jobs. Like not too many women work on oil rinks.
Yeah.
The hazardous sewages,
the hazardous jobs.
It's not distributed in that sense. But I think look, there's always those common things that humans need, right? We all need attention, affection, approval, validation, a sense of belonging and purpose. And I would also add, I think maybe for men, because so much of our purpose and mission in life has to do with providing or working. A person who's struggling with those things in their life as a man, it could increase the likelihood of their depression and suicidality over time because of the circumstances they're in, right? Like if a guy who doesn't have a job for 5 years but has a family he has to provide for, it's going to be a lot more difficult for him than a woman who doesn't have a job but is married to a man who does, but she's also depressed, right? Because it plays a different impact on our psychological expectation, let's say. So yeah, those are just some of my thoughts around that.
Well, definitely when it comes to the suicide rate between men and women, there is a pretty stark difference, right? So in 2009, the CDC, and then later in 2010, the web-based injury statistics query and reporting system, both of these studies concluded that when you look at the suicide rates between age and gender, right, boys and girls, up until puberty, boys and girls are committing suicide at roughly the same rate, right?
Really? Wow.
Which is about like up until like 9 years old-ish, right? So roughly before puberty. And then between the ages of 10 to 14, boys are committing suicide at twice the rate compared to girls. From 15 to 19, boys are committing suicide 3 to 4 times at the rate of girls. And then from 20 to 24, boys are committing suicide at 5 to 6 times the rate compared to girls.
Wow.
Now, there was a website, Statista, that had pulled some data. I believe it was from 2021 or 2022. And they continued to look at the suicide rate by age and gender. Now, they sort of grouped together ages, so they continued on from 25 to 44, which I think they should have just made it in smaller blocks. But even when you continue looking at the suicide rate as the ages go on by gender as well, you find that still men are committing suicide at a higher rate than women. So, if you look at from 25 years old to 44 years old, it's still like twice the rate, right? And then like 45 years old to 63, that's like almost 2.5 times the rate. And then 65 years and up, that's actually surprisingly when men are most vulnerable to committing suicide. And that's where you see a decrease in women committing suicide, which is interesting. So that's when men are most vulnerable when it comes to suicide. So there is definitely a difference when it comes to the suicide rates between men and women. Generally speaking, if you took all the suicide rates comparing men and women, right now men are committing suicide rate at a rate of 3.9 times more than women, than their counterparts. Yeah.
Wow.
And it is a obviously there are multiple variables when it comes to why somebody would want to take their life. Specifically with men, though, you do have this problem that men run into, especially a father, right? And Warren Farrell, he talks about this in The Boy Crisis. He calls it the father's catch-22, which is loving your family by being away from the love of your family because of work, right?
Yeah.
And so oftentimes, men feel trapped, especially when you look at the older generation. They feel trapped that my life purpose was to provide for my family. If I'm not providing, therefore I'm not fulfilling my purpose. And so that's one of the reasons why, a man might decide to take his life, is because he feels that he is not providing the way he should be for his family. He's not valuable. In fact, if he's unemployed, it's a more difficult circumstance for him, because unemployed men are twice as likely to commit suicide compared to employed men, right? And then that, of course, the rate changes when you look at actual professions itself too, right? Like doctors or accountants. So that plays a big factor too, emotional intelligence. If we all, I think we all collectively agree that, boys should take on the characteristic and the trait of emotional intelligence, right? And I think as a Muslim community, we've done a really good job of helping men adapt that trait, of adapting this characteristic, right? Emotional intelligence. But when it comes to adapting emotional intelligence, it's like there has to be outlets for us to be able to know how to do that. Seldom are we going to learn that from our parents. It's just the reality, right? So, a young man learning emotional intelligence, he's probably not going to learn from his parents. He's probably not going to learn from his peers either. Maybe not even a teacher, right? If anything, he'll have to go out and find it himself, right? Find ways to learn emotional intelligence, what that means, right? And I think for anyone who's listening to this, who's a parent, one of the pieces of advice that Dr. Warren Farrell mentions in his book here, The Boy Crisis, is that the best way to teach your son emotional intelligence is family dinner nights. And what that means is you don't want to turn family dinner nights into family dinner nightmares, as he says, right? So, you want to keep these family dinner nights as a way to have discussions and conversations about your son, like asking him open-ended questions, as opposed to forcing him to answer like yes or no, like asking him open-ended questions like, what career paths interest you, right? What major do you want to study when you go to university, right? Like, what are your thoughts on, if you ever wanted to be, I don't know, like a part-time dad and then working part-time as well, right? Being a part-time father and working part-time, like just asking your son these open-ended questions help him develop that emotional intelligence.
That's a really good point. And it's something I definitely would affirm here that having quality family time is so crucial to bonding and emotional health. And for those of us who don't know, the difference between an open question and a closed question is that a closed question is typically prompts a one word or short answer, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how was your day? Good. How was
Good.
school? Fine.
Yeah.
Right. An open question forces you to answer beyond that, and expand. Like, tell me what happened at school today.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You can't just say good or fine.
Right.
What do you do for work? I'm a, construction worker, versus tell me how you got into your current career. It makes you have to talk a bit more about yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
when I can share more about myself or more information, there's more that one can relate to and build off of, right? And so it's kind of like expanding this thing out, right? The conversation out. So that's really good advice, and like that could be like, for example, a simple thing to remind families, or anybody, right, that you should try to share food and meals with people without screens, and talk and practice open questions and feel bonding, with others. Because one of the most successful reasons why somebody has happiness, fulfillment, um, in life is because of healthy social support systems, right? It's one of the ways that humans can develop resilience and get through trauma, depression, low points. It's through people. Okay. It's not being in isolation and watching a bunch of YouTube videos on how to be happy.
Right.
It's about getting out there and connecting with people and experiencing yourself through the eyes of others. So this is a very, very important tool for all of us to implement in our lives, inshallah.
Inshallah. There's actually an excerpt here from The Boy Crisis. I was trying to find it here. And, just because we're on the topic of, how sometimes how men will, the fact that right now men are committing suicide at a higher rate, right? And sort of discussing the potential reasons as to why a man would commit suicide, whether it's like a purpose void, right? Or maybe you're not having any fulfillment in your life, right? One of the things that Dr. Warren Farrell mentions here is that he talks about a story where there was a soldier who was on tour and came back from Afghanistan. And I'll just read it here, what it says. He says that in 2016, Brad returned from his third tour of duty in Afghanistan with a reasonable amount of economic security. But he felt like a stranger to both his wife and himself and quickly alienated his children with his temper. His PTSD and the tension at home left him feeling like a burden. One day, after losing his temper again, Brad bought his wife her favorite flowers and their children the newest PlayStation, gave his wife and kids especially long and loving hugs and kisses, and took out the older of the family cars. He said he was going shopping. Instead, he sped quickly down a curved road and, quote, skidded off a cliff.
Oh, man.
Brad's wife, looking back, she knew that he had committed suicide because she had said that after Brad would lose it, after he'd have those temper moments or incidents, he'd always say that he's worth more as an insurance policy than a husband and a dad.
Wow. Next podcast, I want to talk about the boy crisis, because I'm familiar with Farrell's work. Actually, we should try to reach out to him, see if he would come and talk to us. Yeah,
awesome.
You want to try that?
Yeah, for sure.
Try that.
I think that'd be awesome to have him on. Yeah, this so I mean, even just reading about it in the book, because Dr. Warren Farrell does discuss, things like suicide among men and the suicide rates among men and boys, and because he has a whole chapter dedicated to the mental health struggles rather coming that young boys are dealing with, right? The crisis that boys are dealing with. And when you I mean, it's so multifaceted, man. Like really, it's so multifaceted when it comes to something like suicide. And you don't want to burden people by talking to them about it, because you feel like you're just burdening them, so you keep it in within yourself, and then you start thinking to yourself that, oh, you know what, like no one's listening to me, or no one has the time for me, right? So you just continue to sort of, it's like you're branching off each thought until it becomes darker and darker, right? I know this is something Jordan Peterson mentioned once, when it comes to sort of these thoughts, right? That you start with one thought here, right? And then it branches off to like, I don't want to burden people. Why do I not want to burden people? Because, I'm feeling this way. Why am I feeling this way? Oh, because I'm worthless. Oh, also because this other thing happened last week, which makes me feel even worse. So you just keep branching off and off until you get to a point where you're just like in the thick of it, in the black hole of suicidality.
Yeah. There are a lot of factors. I mean, if it's not it's not a simple thing, but
Right.
I feel like as far as like kind of closing tips for me, efforts of bonding with others, establishing intimacy in relationships with your family, with your friends, quality time, these things improve, the likelihood of healthy mental health, or mindset, feeling that bond. Second is, of course, people who don't have a type of purpose or mission or way to contribute value to the world. That also affects us deeply. And so, looking for this, finding this, or trying this mission is very important as well. Like, what is my purpose? What am I? And the best way to kind of start with that is, what am I good at? Right. And you can think about when you were a kid, there's always things that you were more inclined to do. It excited you and you were good at it. I always enjoyed talking with people. I was the kid, a toddler on the airplane who would talk to the random couple behind us and become their friend. And, that was me, dude. Like, I was a sociable person. I like to teach, since I was a kid, I played teacher with my little sister and brother, right? And so education, that was like something I found inclination towards, music. So having that purpose, that mission and sense of value, contribution is another important thing that people should nourish in themselves. Third is, and this is connected, I think, because of our age with social media. I mean, in the field of psychology, we are understanding more and more that, and this is also something you find in religion. So for example, like part of the Sunnah to purify diseases of the heart, to increase happiness, fulfillment, and so forth, is to do something called khidmah, which means to be in service of others. And when I am spending, you can, and this is something I learn a lot, of course, when I work with people in cognitive behavioral therapy and understanding people's inner script. We all talk to ourselves. We all think about ourselves. That's natural. But those of us who do that to a pathological level, like I'm always thinking about myself. I'm always worried about how other people are seeing me, or what if I do this, what are they going to think? Or if I sit like this or say that, or I don't say this, or what should I do? Those people are the ones who are high anxiety, insecurity, and can increase the likelihood of depression. Now we have this culture of, I'm constantly comparing myself, looking for likes, looking for validation through social media while I'm competing with billions of other people. It's very hard to feel good about yourself because you're always thinking about yourself through social media and how I compare and compete with others, and are people responding, are they liking me, and so on, right. Whereas when you're focused on other people, you actually feel happier, less anxiety, more secure, and you're more effective, contribute more value, right? And this is why when you go on a Saturday to feed the hungry, And you're not thinking about, what you're going to eat on Saturday and what you're going to watch and what you're going to do, but you're actually thinking and empathizing. Going to our earlier point, you're practicing practical empathy because you're feeling for others who don't have the same resources or the same opportunities or life as you, and you're trying to go and do something about it. And so that third reminder is, the more we're obsessed with ourselves and thinking about ourselves, and we increase our anxiety and we can increase our depression. Whereas if I focus my energy on others, and you can practice this in a very simple social setting, right? Like we've all been there. We go to a new space. There's a bunch of people we don't know. If the whole time I'm preoccupied with, what do I do? Who do I talk to? Where do I stand? Should I say anything? These guys look nice. Should I go say hello and try to get in the conversation? I'm actually giving off the energy and my nonverbal communication, and I'm feeling the anxiety, the sadness, the lack of confidence, all that stuff, versus just focusing on the other people rather than myself. It actually makes you more able to socialize, to connect, and people to also feel comfortable around you. Right? Versus like the awkward dude who's like, just twitching and standing in the circle, right? But doesn't know what to do with themselves, right? So, those are some reminders. And of course, anybody who's, ever thought or anyone who's feeling depressed or thinking about suicide, there's a number of resources that I strongly encourage you to use. And specifically, I'm not talking about going to read articles. I'm saying call these hotlines.
Yes.
These support systems are out there. They're 24/7. Someone will answer and someone will be there for you. And that's something that any of us can do, and you should do it. There's no judgment. There's nothing to feel bad or silly about. It could help you in ways you didn't imagine. And so anybody feeling this way should take these opportunities seriously and inshallah harness suicide prevention hotlines, because that's why they're there.
Inshallah. I think the last things I wanted to say about this, just to sort of piggyback on your piece of advice. So number one, I would say is that, again, focus on your hope, purpose, that mission that you have in your life, right? For religious people like ourselves, people who follow a faith, we do have that blessing of that the purpose is already here. But what we struggle with is like finding that mission, that thing that we're good at, right? Which essentially is what purpose is for people who are not religious, right? Finding their purpose. For us, it would be finding our mission, right? So sort of like what you mentioned, focus on that thing that you're good at, right? And even if it's not going to make you any sort of stream of income, whatever it may be, find a way to do it, whether it's, if you can't do it every day, maybe a few times a week, maybe if it's once a week, but that thing that gives you that glint in your eyes, find that thing, right? The second thing I would say is keep a journal and write in that journal. Journaling your thoughts is one of the best ways to really ground yourself. And in my experience, it's been an excellent way to overcome stress and anxiety. It's almost an instant way to overcome stress and anxiety, right? Anne Frank, she has a quote. She says that paper is more patient than people, right? So write in that journal. I mean, if you're writing several pages all in one sitting, do that, and keep that journal with you, have it on you at all times if possible. The third thing I would say is get your body moving, do some form of exercise with your body. And it doesn't have to be super intense. I'm not making an announcement that I want everyone to start running marathons. No, I mean, a simple, short 15-minute run a few times a week, going outside to walk 10 minutes a day. These sort of simple ways to get that body moving, release that dopamine, any other chemical in your brain that allows that sort of state within your mind to feel that, I'm doing something with my body. My body feels alive. I feel alive, right? And which ties in with that fourth point I wanted to make, is just eat more healthy foods, try and cut out
Mhm.
junk foods. I'm not saying go completely cold turkey, never eat a piece of junk food or drink, some sort of sodas ever again. What I'm saying is just cut it down, right? And I would say particularly avoid it at night, because consuming junk food that late, you quite literally will become a couch potato and you just feel awful in the morning. And so cut down on the junk foods, increase the amount of healthy foods you're eating, cut down on sugars, carbs, whatever it may be. And then my last thing I would say here is just just know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees your struggle. He knows your struggle more than anyone else, and that he will always be there for you to turn to him. He will never ever turn away from you. He will never get tired of hearing you complain to him, like people will become tired of hearing complaints to us. He will continue to be there. He's closer to us than our jugular vein. He loves us more than our mothers, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Noaman, for your presence today. And I look forward to our next meeting. And thank you all for listening. Please don't forget to follow myself and Noaman on our pages listed in the description. Support this podcast at patreon.com/Coffee with Karim. And we'll see you next time.
Coffee with Karim podcast.